Hey guys, this is Richie coming at you with another online Bible study video. It's good to be back with you. Get another video recorded. Missed last week because I was sick, my whole family was sick. Everybody's sick in Borden at this time of year, so that happens. If this is the first video you're stumbling upon, go ahead and go back to the very beginning. Start with John 1. Today we're in John chapter 7. We're going to do the last passage of that chapter. Verses 40 down through the end of the chapter. So if you got your Bible, go ahead and grab John, open it up to John chapter 7, and we'll read from there. So verse 40 starts with this. It says, "When they heard these words, some of the people said, 'This really is the prophet.' Others said, 'This is the Christ.' But some said, 'Is the Christ to come from Galilee? Has not the scripture said that Christ comes from the offspring of David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David was?' So there was a division among the people over him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. The officers then came to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who said to them, 'Why did you not bring him?' The officers answered, 'No one has ever spoke like this man.' The Pharisees answered them, 'Have you also been deceived? Have any of the authorities of the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed.' Nicodemus, who had gone to him before, who was one of them, said to them, 'Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?' They replied, 'Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee.'" All right, so there's the end of the chapter there. And if you watch the study before this one through John chapter 7, 25 down through 39, actually, you'll understand what's going on here. The whole narrative has been from the entire chapter 7 is he was going to the feast. His brothers were going up to the feast. His actual physical brothers were going up to the feast. He came later, went into the synagogue and was preaching and teaching. And he basically said that he was from God, that he was not preaching on his own authority, he was preaching from God's authority, his Father's authority. And down through there, and basically 25 through 39, there's a lot of people questioning Jesus, questioning whether he is who he is. They're saying, is this not the man that we're seeking to kill? We know where he comes from. How does he say we don't know where he comes from or who he comes from. So they were seeking to arrest him. The Pharisees were ready to get him. So they're saying, well, when the actual Christ does arrive, will he do more signs than this man has done? So then they send officers. The Pharisees heard all this. The Pharisees heard the crowds, so the Pharisees send officers to go and arrest him. And Jesus says, I'm only be here a little bit longer. I'm going to go back to him who sent me. He's talking about heaven, obviously. And then he goes through the whole rivers of the living water. If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, the scripture said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. So he's going through this whole discourse. This is the same narrative at the Feast of the Booths, and he's going through it. So then basically what we have here, John has chronicled the sentiment and the conversation of the people. Most of the time you get the narrative of what Jesus is doing, what Jesus is saying, what people are saying to Jesus. But John includes here, for our benefit, down from verse 40, the divisions among the people and the divisions among the believers and non-believers of Jesus there at the time. It says some people said that this is really the prophet. Some said this is the Christ. So you can see right off the bat, there are people that believe that Jesus is the Messiah here in the first century. There were people that believed that he was who he said he was, that he was from God. He was the Messiah that the Old Testament prophets had been, foretelling about, and that he was the fulfillment of that. People thought that he was one of the prophets, another great prophet. They thought he was another, the next Elijah coming down to be a great prophet to the people. If you read through the Old Testament and you understand how the Old Testament works and how this common thread ran through the whole thing of the prophets, even during the time of the kings, you have these prophets talking to the people. During the time of judges, you have the prophets talking to the people. After the exile and the captivities, there were always prophets there talking to the people, trying to get the people to come back to God. So they're thinking that maybe he's just another prophet that's come from God. Between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's about 400 years where God was silent to them, that there were no prophets, there were no revelations, nothing was going on. It was just silence. And so Jesus coming, people were thinking, hey, this is a new prophet, that God's breaking his silence, and here comes a prophet. So the divisions among the people, there were some that thought he was a prophet, some that straight up thought he was the Christ. Some said, how could this be the Christ if he's coming from Galilee? Isn't he supposed to be from the tribe of David? Shouldn't he be coming from Bethlehem? That's what the scriptures say. Well, how come he's not coming from Bethlehem? And obviously, we know from reading the Bible that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. But that the scripture that they're talking about harkens back to Micah, who was an Old Testament prophet, one of the minor prophets. In chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid at Haim with a rod. They strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, you two are little among the clans of Judah. From you shall come forth one who is a ruler in Israel, who is coming forth from the ancient days." So you see that, the scripture clearly says that this Messiah, the great ruler of Israel, is going to come out of Bethlehem. So they're saying, well, how is, this guy's from Galilee, he can't be it. He doesn't meet the requirement. But we obviously know that he was actually born in Bethlehem, but then he grew up in Nazareth, which was in Galilee. So that's a big thing there too. So it says, that there were a lot of divisions among the people because they didn't know what to think of Jesus. And honestly, can you really blame them? Here is this man, Jesus, who comes down and says he's the Son of God. He's preaching on the authority of God. He's going to die and come back from the dead. He's the one that can take away the sins of the world. Just this crazy stuff. You have these devout Jews who are doing everything they can to fulfill the law of God. And one of the main laws, the first and second commandment, have no other gods before me, make no graven images. They have been fighting themselves and not not worshiping other people, not worshiping other gods, not worshiping other idols. Yet here is this man who says, hey, I am the Son of God. I am the Messiah. So it would have been hard for them to understand. But then when you think about all the proof and all the works and everything, all the evidence that pointed to him actually being the Messiah, that they should have picked it up. So the officers come to the chief priests and the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are like, well, why didn't you arrest him? We told you to arrest him. We sent you to arrest him. How come you didn't arrest him? And the officers are like, no one has ever spoke like this man. They're like, this guy's, he was the real deal. And they're like, surely you haven't fallen for this too. But then Nicodemus, he steps up and he speaks up for Jesus. And he says, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? If you remember in John chapter 3 that we studied, Nicodemus came to Jesus in the middle of the night, and we can understand from that conversation that Nicodemus believed that Jesus was from God, believed that he was a supernatural being, because that was the only way he could do the certain signs and wonders that he was doing and performing. And that's where we got the whole discourse of he must be born again, and then, obviously John 3:16 is then that whole conversation. So a lot going on there. So Nicodemus, who is a believer in Jesus at the least, we don't know what he did with that conversation after, we don't know what he did after the conversation with Jesus. He could have been a full-on follower of Jesus that he just didn't let the Pharisees know because obviously they would have kicked him out or worse, killed him. So he kind of stands up and he says, doesn't our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does? And then they said, are you too from Galilee? See that no prophet rises from Galilee. So they're basically saying, what are you on his side too? And they're accusing him. So I'm sure Nicodemus probably backed off there with their line of questioning, but he did try to stand up for it. But this just goes to show you that as human beings, as people, we are, there's going to be times where we don't fully understand, and there's going to be times where we are wrong about things that we have to study and look at all the evidence that we possibly can to come to the best answer, in matters of life and everyday life, and in the huge matters of, spirituality and, of God and faith and, coming to Jesus. When you look at the Bible and you understand, all the evidence for the Bible, all the evidence for creation, all the evidence for a creator, and all the evidence for Jesus, the life that he lived, the sinless life that he lived, the the death that he died on the cross and the evidence for the resurrection. When you look at all that stuff and you study that and you really think about it intellectually, and you come to the realization that yes, this is true, that Jesus really was the Messiah. He really was the Son of God. He was the Christ. He was the one that was foretold by the prophets. He's the one that God sent to save us all. And when we come to that realization, that's when we can have true, deep faith in God and truly deep faith in Jesus, and then we can grow in our faith from there. So that's a pretty big thing. As humans, we like to form opinions pretty quick, and we like to never bend on those. We like to be right, but knowing Jesus is obviously the most important thing that we can do. So if you don't know Jesus, I encourage you to get there. Email me, call me, we'll talk about it, and we'll get you there. So anyway, so that's all we got for today. Next Bible study, we will do the John 8 down through 11, 1 through 11, John 8, 1 through 11. And obviously, huge subject matter there. That is the woman caught in adultery. So a lot of stuff going on there. So very good. Well, until we get to that, God bless. And as always, if you got any questions or anything, feel free to get in contact with me somehow. So thank you all so very much, and God bless.